Great. John, one quick one on the charter flights. Are those free of cost to American citizens?
I would refer you to the State Department. Typically they are, but I mean, I don't have they're still working through the details of how they're going to coordinate these.
And then on the $6 billion, we know that 100 senators were told on Tuesday night that the plan was basically to leave any requests for withdrawals pending indefinitely. And now we know that House Democrats were told by the Deputy Treasury Secretary behind closed doors this morning pretty much the same, with one added layer that there's an agreement with Qatar not to let those funds be dispersed. Why is it that you won't come out and say that the U.S. does not intend to let this money go to Iran?
Jacqui, we've always had, since the beginning, we've always had the ability to provide oversight over the disbursement of these funds. We've always had the option, if we wanted it, to look at transactions and to make a call about whether we found it valid or not. That has not changed. And even now, as you and I are speaking, none of that money has been accessed by anybody. It's still all there.
Is it because we think that freezing it essentially again would complicate any negotiations with Iran or our ability to get Americans home in the future?
I'm not going to go into any more detail.
Okay, and then on the overland and by sea and by land efforts, I guess why is it that we find ourselves in so many situations trying to get Americans out, and that it's largely happening, not through a government effort, but we're telling, civilians to find their way across a border in a war zone. It happened in Ukraine. Why is it that we found ourselves in that position so many times, it seems?
In what position exactly?
Where we're directing American citizens to basically find their own way to U.S. help on the other side, whereas you've got other countries that are sending their military in or doing evacuations in a more formal way.
Well, first of all, Americans and dual passport holders live all over the world, and sometimes they choose to live in places where bad things happen. We're not in a position of lecturing to Americans where they can go live, work, or travel, recreate. Number two, they don't have to tell us that they're there. So sometimes it's really hard to get a sense of what the population is. In places like Israel, there are a lot of Americans. Most of them, maybe most are dual nationals, but a lot of Americans are there. Other nations have smaller populations, and maybe they have to make their own decisions about how they're going to handle those smaller populations. We also have to be respectful of the needs and the desires of Americans who live there. We know that some want to leave. We also know that a lot of them want to stay. It's home. They don't want to go, and we have to respect that as well. So we tailor the approach based on what's going on and what's going on geographically inside a country, because some parts of countries that are in distress are safer than others, and people are less likely to want to go. You have to take all that into consideration. And the other thing I'd say to your question is, as this situation evolves, you should expect that so too will our approach evolve. And if there's a need to do more or to do it differently, well, by goodness, we'll do that. But right now, in the early hours, there was still ample commercial flights going out of Ben Gurion, and certainly there were some viable land routes. We kept, and part of the reason why we're doing this is because we have such good communication with Americans, and we're having these conversations, and we realized that as the situation has evolved, more and more Americans were expressing a desire to leave. And because not all carriers are working out of Ben Gurion, this made sense as the next best move. If we have to adjust it, we absolutely will.
On the day of jihad, are we doing anything to fortify, I guess, the U.S. against any potential activity against Americans, domestically or abroad, given the calls for a day of jihad and your statement yesterday that now is not the time to go back and look at any intelligence gaps? Is it the time, being that tomorrow is supposed to be this day of jihad?
What I meant by yesterday was we're focused on making sure that our intelligence sharing with the Israelis is as sharp and as good as possible for the operations that they are in. I saw some reporting that made it sound like I blew it off. That is not the case. We understand that there will be a need to go back and look at what was missed, by whom, and when. Of course we're going to do that. But we've got to stay focused on the task at hand right now. And as for your second question, absolutely, we are constantly in touch with local law enforcement, state and federal officials across the country to make sure that we are as vigilant as we can be to be able to identify and disrupt any threats to the American people. We're absolutely going to stay focused on that.